All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you spending some time with me this morning. ADUs have been really exciting. I think it's very likely to be an important factor for the next generation of wealth creation. We kind of reverse some of the issues that we've had in the past. And now anyone that owns a house or is looking at buying a house should really consider getting one of these. And so hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll understand how it's so compelling that ideally the question won't be, I can't afford to build this. It'd be, I couldn't afford not to build one of these things in my property, right? So let's get started on that. About me and my company, you know, I met Lynn several years ago when I first started flipping properties. I was sharing space out of the KW and Friars in Mission Valley there. And from that, you know, we started flipping houses, and my construction team with Blake, director of construction, got so good that people started asking us to renovate their homes because they'd come to our flips and say, these are such nice quality, could you remodel? In fact, most recently, I just put out a new flip in Coronado at 300 G Avenue. If you guys have any buyers, it'd be great to work with you. But a neighbor came over and said, please remodel my house. This is awesome. So I was like, even for fancy Coronado buyers, you know, we've got good enough quality for that. But we have reasonable prices too, because my partner is in the military still, active duty reserve. He's just got promoted as a commander. He's very diligent about making sure that the pricing and timing and communication is all very strong. And so that's one of our key selling points, is that oftentimes people call us because we call them back. And then also we get clients that will refer to us to their clients and call us back for additional work, et cetera, et cetera. The other guys in my team, the construction team officially started in July of 2018 as a separate S Corp that I'm part owner of. And these are some of the other guys that are the key management at our company. And then we have a bunch of laborers as well. And then in addition to that, for a lot of the ADU stuff, we sub out a lot of the work, but then these guys manage the work, making sure that the plans are getting done and the customer's happy along the way. So TJ and Kenny have huge amounts of experience. They've been doing construction since they were kids. And so they're who I rely on, because I am not the guy that builds these things. I just can run the business and make sure that people understand what they're getting into. So an ADU's got different names, and incredibly, actually, the different names actually mean something else. So like, you know, one of the ways that people call an ADU is a guest house, but technically per code, a guest house is actually a completely different thing. Where it's relevant is here in the coastal zone, especially. One of my clients, just a block away from where I live on Emerald Street, I'm in the coastal zone, and I have a guest house behind my house. It's not an ADU. So when it was built by the prior owner several years ago, the reason they did that way is because it avoids going through coastal commissions. So if you have clients that are in the coastal, they might want to consider doing a guest house versus an ADU, because the difference is at least $15,000 to $17,000 in extra permitting fees with the coastal commission, and then up to an additional 13 months in review time by the coastal commission, over and above what the city charges. So if they got a guest house, it saved them a lot of trouble and money, but they won't get a separate address. They're technically not supposed to have a kitchen, a fully functioning kitchen with like a stove and stuff. And you're not supposed to rent it out. It's technically meant just for your guests that are your friends or family that are going to be staying for here or there. You're not supposed to technically rent it out, but there's laws in place right now. And that's one of the key things that's going to be a recurring theme through this, is that there's more and more laws that are getting passed every few months to make this easier and easier to build. So one of the key laws that's coming through is that they're trying to make a law where building an ADU in the coastal zone would not have to go to coastal review, which would save you $15,000+ and over a year of review time. So that'll happen eventually. So one of the things we're advising is, hey, maybe it makes sense to build a guest house for right now to save that money. And when that law passes in 3 or 6 months, we can convert it to an ADU at nominal cost, and you'll have a separate license, and you can legally have the kitchen and legally rent it out. You know, on the gray side of this, no one's really doing any enforcement. Like I have a guest house, and I'll admit to rent it out. Hopefully you guys don't report me to code enforcement, but there's no enforcement. It's kind of like the short-term vacation rental thing. You're not so technically supposed to do it, but there's no enforcement. So effectively, it's almost like it's legal. Questions? You guys can chime in whenever, since especially we've got a small group here. So different types, as you can see here. Oh, go ahead.
Quick question. So as far as doing a guest house versus the ADU, you had mentioned that there's a certain permit that you don't need, or it'd be cheaper to do a guest house. How much cheaper did you say would be for the permit?
You know, just in the examples I've seen here locally within a block of my house, $15,000 to $17,000 cheaper just in permits, and an extra year of permitting time. So we're doing one on Law Street right here in PV, and we'd submitted it to Coastal, I think last August, and we just got approval. So it took 12 months. And in that one, because it was a small ADU garage conversion, it was only $13,000. But you know, he was really adamant on doing the ADU route. So we're building the ADU, so we're starting to break ground right now on that one.
Got it. Thank you.
So as you can see, the different types: over the garage, which is the one that we're doing on Law Street; garage conversion, which we just finished one in Claremont; standalone unit, we just finished one on University Heights; and basement or attic units. We haven't really seen too many of those. We had our first opportunity a few months ago in La Mesa because the property was in a hillside and did have a basement that would have been suitable. But most houses in San Diego don't have basements, as you know. These restrictions keep getting looser. One of the big things that's changed this year is that now solar it needs to be on any standalone ADU. If it's attached to your property or garage conversion, you don't need to add solar. But if you're having a standalone detached ADU, it does need solar. They can be as small as 150 square feet and as big as 1,200 square feet. And that excludes garages. So if you wanted to add a 2 or 3 or 4 car garage, that doesn't get enclosed into that space. There's lots of different rules on there. I can send you guys a link, or if you look up San Diego ADU guidelines, there's like a cheat sheet of like 2 or 3 pages that'll tell you all the different rules, setbacks, things like that. One problem that I have with that cheat sheet is that it only has the rules that have passed through city review, even though the state has passed looser guidelines. For example, earlier this year, the state passed a guideline that said now you can build an ADU up to 800 square feet over and above your max FAR. Now, if you don't know what FAR means, it stands for Florida Area Ratio. And on any given development, every zone and every zoning has different FARs depending on where you live and what you can build. So for example, let me give you a rough example. My lot where I live right now is about 6,000 square feet, and I have a 0.5 FAR, which means my gross building area, Florida Area Ratio, can be 3,000 square feet, so 50% of the 6,000. So anything above that, I technically wouldn't be able to build, except that now, if I didn't already have an ADU or a guest house, I would be able to build an additional 800 square feet over the 3,000. So most recently, one of my friends in Crown Point wants to build one on his. He's got one of these new long skinnies, and anytime those new long skinnies are developed, they are maxed out in FAR, right? They might have a 4,000 square foot lot, and they've built a 2,000 square foot house on there with a 400 square foot carport, right? But now they're saying, yeah, you can build an 800 square foot ADU in addition to that. But when we checked with the city over the last couple of weeks, they're like, yeah, we know that law is passed, but we haven't reviewed it for the city yet. So it's kind of one of those problems where it's slow processing time, but we're planning to push that issue because I think that'll open up a few more ADUs to our opportunity. So other updates, HOA communities, you can't restrict you from building one, and you don't need to have owner occupancy anymore either. Additional rules that have passed are that now you can have an ADU and a junior ADU, which means you can put an exterior door in one of your bedrooms and basically call that a junior ADU, which you can also rent out separately. So different rules on setbacks and parking restrictions. I don't need to get into the nitty gritty, but the main purpose of this call is to kind of get you guys excited and get your clients excited to understand that for the most part, the answer is yes. So lots of benefits of building these things. Obviously, there's a huge housing shortage in California. We need a lot more units, and we're not building as many units as we need to accommodate the housing. That's why we have the vacancy issues that we do with renters, and the housing appreciation that's going up still, even in the middle of a huge pandemic. We still have prices going up and shortage of properties. So people need places to live, and the state is trying to encourage us to build units by allowing ADUs, which effectively turns any single family property into a multi-unit. Additionally, it allows for multi-unit properties to also have ADUs, right? I've got developer friends that are buying up 2 units in all over the city and then adding an additional 1 to 2 units on them. So it makes a good investment, an even better investment when you can build these things. Additionally, there's financial incentives. There's some county and city incentives where they lower the fees and the costs. Specifically, they're waiving the DIF fees, which is the development impact fees, which can range between $7,000 and $17,000 versus what it was a couple years ago. So the permit fees have decreased quite a bit. It's still not free. So if anyone thinks that they're building these things for free or getting their plans or permits for free, it's just not happening. So it still costs money to do stuff. Lots of different reasons to do this. 50-50. It's 50% of our people are doing it because they want to house family, either adult children or their parents, or someone else. Like we even had someone that built an ADU to house their dog sitter. So depending on how what you want it for, there's a lot of different reasons to do it, and obviously it can be a lot more affordable than having to get separate housing for someone. We'll get into the numbers a little bit more, but roughly you can build for about $250 to $350 a square foot. Most property in San Diego sells for over $500 a square foot, so you're getting instant equity. And I'll get into the appraisal aspects of this a little bit, but effectively, there's very few cases where I've seen where the net income over what it would cost to build it in terms of financing costs is $1,000 or more in most cases. Right, in terms of your rent versus your PITI and the additional amount that it would take to build one of these things. We'll get into that a little bit more soon. So this part was done by Sidney Loisow, who's a reputable appraisal that knows ADUs very well. So I'll do my best to replicate his information so you kind of understand how this works on the valuation part, because this is a common question. And so on prior iterations of these webinars, I'd have him on and explain it and go into detail. But effectively, there's two ways to do ADUs, and that's a sales comparison, which everyone's familiar with, and there's the income approach, but basically saying that this is what it rents for, and based on that, this is what the value is. So the sales comparison, you're trying to find houses that have ADUs and then make adjustments based on that, right? So everyone's familiar with that, but sometimes the problem is there's no houses that sold with an ADU in my neighborhood or within a mile or within the last 6 months or whatever it is. So if that doesn't work, then you go to what's called the income approach, which is kind of like figuring out what the rent is and then figuring out the GRM, which is the gross rent multiplier, and ratio of purchase price to its annual rental income. So we don't have to make this a math story problem, but there's some math story problems. So case study one, this is the house that has has comps on it, and you can kind of see the values, right? Main home's renting at $2,650, Granny Flat's renting at $1,700. The gross rent multiplier is $175. So they're saying the value is about $750 on this, and without the ADU, that house would have sold for $300,000 less. Okay. Here's another study, is Cardiff. This is a main house, 2,400 square feet that would rent for $6,500, and 700 square foot granny flat that would rent for $2,500. So in this case, the ADU is worth an additional $625,000, right? And to build something that's 721 square feet would probably be about $300,000. Make sense? Okay, so that's just the value portion. So, with equity itself, that's a strong, compelling factor there. So the process, people are like, hey, how to get started. So typically someone calls us and says, so just last week, one of my friends that owns a bunch of restaurants at PB said, hey, I need to build one of these. I heard you're the guy to call. And we're like, great. I ran the numbers on the desktop based on his address. So people often call me and say, hey, I need to build a house, an ADU in Tierra Santa. Can you do it? I'm like, you didn't even give me an address. So at least give me the address so I can research the property. So from that, we can kind of tell if we can build it and what the potential is based on what the client wants. So we do a site study to kind of take a look at it and see what's possible and if it can be built up, if you're at the FAR, if you're beyond it, and some other basic stuff like that. For the most part, I do these for free. I just put a $249 on there so we don't get kind of, window shoppers that are calling us and killing 2-3 hours of our time to see if they can build one and not vet them out. But usually we vet out the client properly and say, okay, as long as you have a basic understanding of the timeline and the costs associated with this, we'll do the site study for free. After that, we basically do a two-way system with our clients to move forward with this, which is a design portion of the process, which is saying, all right, let's get with an architect or a draftsperson that can help draw up the plans how you want it, and then make sure it suits your needs. And then based on the plans that you make, we'll put together a bid, and that's a separate construction bid. So the idea is that we'll help you choose the designer or the draftsman or architect to make your plans, and then also make sure that they're building it or designing it in a way that meets your budget. So if someone tells us their budget is $300,000, we work with the architect to make sure that they're not over designing it to put in super expensive features that would never meet the budget, right? We've had that happen where the client had a nice house in Point Loma and wanted a magazine-worthy ADU. And so they hired, we had picked them towards a high-end architect that would do awesome stuff. And they had a budget of $300,000, which is fair, But by the time the architect was done, it would have been 550. So we were like, look, let's go back to the drawing board and eliminate some of these super expensive features that you put into it to get it back closer to your budget. But at that point, at least we know before we start breaking ground how much it's going to cost, and that's all within the permitting and planning phase. Any questions there? Okay, so that takes 3 to 4 months, and figure about $10,000 to $15,000 total for the plans and the plans to get done, and the permits are additional fee over that. In terms of construction, you know, it can be as little as $200, $225 a foot for larger properties. For the 1,200 square foot properties with garages, it could be as much as $350 or $400 a foot for smaller properties. The key difference being is the economy of scale, right? Even in a small ADU, we're having to put in a kitchen and an HVAC system and plumbing for all the for the bathrooms and all the water fixtures. So, but in a bigger space, you're still only having one kitchen. Maybe you have a second bathroom, but then bedrooms are kind of cheap because you don't need tile and plumbing and electrical, et cetera, et cetera. Make sense? So the smaller the property, the higher the price per square foot to build. The larger the property, the lower the price per square foot to build. That's why, you know, neighborhood developers can build at, you know, 175 to 200 a foot, because they're building 2,400 square foot houses, and they're large and they get the economy of scale. So I just wanted to show a close-up of plans of an ADU that we did in Claremont. This is a garage conversion, and some people, you know, contact us thinking that these things should cost $20,000 or $30,000. I'm like, well, the kitchen alone is $20,000, right? Did you want a kitchen? Because countertops and cabinets and appliances and lighting and stuff can be expensive. Same with all the plumbing work. So this is just some schematics of the electrical plan, where you can kind of see where electrical is going and what the room dimensions are. And to frame this out, it's kind of technical to be able to do this properly. You can't just slap in some cabinets and call it an ADU. But you can see where the AC is located, the tankless water heater, how complicated the bathroom is, because we do have a washer and dryer stack in there as well. You have to have all the vent fans and windows, et cetera, et cetera. So this is that same ADU. You can see us framing in the garage door. In the middle left there is the door to get in, and the right is a framed out window. Same ADU, you can see the owner wanted to vault the ceiling, so we had to redo the whole roof and put in some beams to make it vaulted ceilings instead of a low 8 or 10 foot ceiling. So now it's got like 12-foot vaulted ceilings in the middle, which makes it feel a lot bigger than the 430 square feet it is. Here's some of it more framed out. You can kind of see some of the rough electrical work done in there. Kind of see that, you know, the framing itself takes quite a bit of work to do properly. And then this is kind of a close-up of where we had to saw cut the floor, the slab on grade in the garage, to see just the plumbing and the sewer lines just for the bathroom alone. So design, if you wanted to use a designer, for example, like I use a designer in my ADU or my guest house in the back, just because I was renting it out and I wanted it to look pretty. So I hired a designer to help pick materials, the tile, the fixtures, the colors, the window treatments, et cetera, furniture, rugs, artwork, just to make it look nice, because I'm not good at that. So I hired someone that is. So overall costs, you can kind of see roughly here: permits and drafting, 10 to 30,000, construction, 200 to 350 a foot, design optional depending on what you want to do with it, about $3 a square foot. And then it takes about 9 months. We tell people basically 8 to 12 months. We tell them to plan for 12. If we can get it done earlier, then great. The only kind of limitations are if there's issues with supplies or materials or subcontractors or weather. And we had a project get delayed by a month or two because we're trying to pour foundation during winter time when it was raining a lot. We couldn't get a couple of dry days in a row. So cost breakdown. So there are renovation loans that you can get. Obviously, the easiest way is if you have cash. The second easiest way is if you can do a cash out refinance. And the third easiest way is if you get like a construction loan or a renovation loan. I'll be working with some other fund managers to put together a fund. There's other companies in LA and San Francisco that offer kind of a cradle to grave project where they'll do the financing as well, but it's a little bit more complicated. So I'm looking into that because I find that about half the people that approach us don't have their financing figured out or the funds figured out. So there are options, but if you don't have equity and you can't get a construction loan, your options become less limited or more limited. And so I'm working on some solutions for that, because I think that it's worthwhile to build these even if you can't get a loan. And I think there's a way I can structure that. So there are loans to do this. There's some good companies that can do construction loans and renovation loans that are familiar with the ADU process. Return on investment, we kind of mentioned this already, right? You're getting the instant equity and you're also getting your cash flow as well. I like this chart. You guys could use this when you're doing listing presentations. You could pay less, but you're going to get more stress dealing with one of those Redfin agents or something like that. But you know, when someone wants to call you at 8:30 at night, it's worth paying a little bit more for that. So a tax strategy, and so I put some numbers together because there's something called a cost segregation study. And so cost segregation is something that's often done by commercial property owners, where they break out the components of a building based on its depreciation schedule set by the IRS. Typically, most unsavvy people will just kind of depreciate their whole asset over 27.5 years. But what you can do is actually depreciate at a much quicker state. And I'll show you that. So here's some assumptions. We're looking at $800,000 house. Primary house is worth about 600. ADU is worth about 200. And there's a square footage 21 and 876. And the rent on the ADU is 2,060. I'm just kind of using some low estimates. So I kind of did some low estimates on value and rent. And then I also threw in the depreciation and cost segregation numbers that I got from my own cost segregation report for my guest house. So you can write off your expenses, right? That's most common, right? If you got your mortgage interest, your taxes and your utilities and maintenance, that's $44.35 for your whole property, right? The ADU is about 30% the size of your total building. So 30% of $44.35 is $1,300. So you're writing that off of your monthly. Annually, that's $15,600. So now this is where the cost segregation works, right? First, you do asset reallocation. You say it's kind of a mixed use property, your ADU. And then the ADU itself, the structure is worth 27.5 years. The furniture that you have in it, it can be depreciated over 5 years. The fixtures, like your plumbing and your light fixtures, et cetera, and your window treatments, it's a 7-year asset. And then your land improvements, the concrete and the landscaping, the grading around your property, that's a 15-year depreciation. So when you divide those numbers up, you get a larger depreciation than having to do the whole ADU at just 27.5 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Jay's nodding. Okay. Ehab's getting it. All right. Lynn gets it too. Cool. All right. So we're catching that. So now going back to the numbers we had, gross rent was $2,000. The operating expenses was $1,300, and your depreciation from this is $1,000. So even though you're making money, you're showing that the IRS that you're losing $300 a month.
Like that.
Or about $3,600 a year, which you now can write off of your ordinary income. And whatever your tax bracket is, you get that much more in tax savings. Does that make it pretty compelling? Does that make sense? And this is a very conservative estimate. If I actually showed you my real numbers, you'd be kind of surprised because it's a lot more compelling than that. And so I'm trying to just show conservative numbers so I'm not over-promising, because this all varies. So key thing with cost segregation reports is that if you go to a typical accountant or a cost segregation specialist, they might charge you anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000. I've got a guy that does it for about $1,000. And so my tax benefit this year alone was about $1,000. So it paid for itself in the first year. Every other year after that's going to be icing on the cake.
Wow.
So in the same example, if you look at your income, you're at $24,700. You have a loss of $3,600, right? If you assume a 30% tax bracket, you're saving $1,100 that year in tax. So your net with your income plus your savings is almost $26,000. On your asset, that's 12.9% cap rate, right? Even any way I've calculated this, every time I calculate this, it comes to a 10 to 11 to 12% at the minimum as a cap rate. So when people say they're buying investment properties at 4% in San Diego and they're not building ADUs, they're really doing themselves a disservice. Or if they're going to Arizona or Michigan or Tennessee to buy a property that does cap at 10%, well, why wouldn't you do the same thing in your backyard and have a much better appreciation aspect as well? Because properties in Tennessee don't appreciate like they do in San Diego. Your net cash flow, right after you pay for your expenses, you're still keeping over $9,000, just your cash flow, and that's 37% cash flow. So I like that Jay's smiling and nodding because you're starting to see how much this makes sense to do. That's it. That's my presentation. I can show you a couple pictures of some stuff that we've got going on. Please, I'd love to hear feedback on the presentation and also our website. This is one of our houses that we just finished in Mount Soledad. It's already sold and stuff.
I have a question.
but there's a nice video associated with it. Yes.
So any home that is zoned R1 will allow for ADUs?
Correct. So prior to the laws passing in 2017, based on the restrictions they had with parking and easements and setbacks and zoning and HOAs, only 5% or less of properties in California would have qualified for an ADU. Now with the laws that have passed, it's virtually 100%.
Okay.
Virtually every house that we've looked at could convert their garage or add an ADU somewhere on their property.
And that would just all depend on the FAR type of the size of the ADU would depend on the FAR.
Yeah, there's different considerations. It's unfortunately not a one-step calculation to figure out if one can be built. There's usually a few different things that we have to look into to make sure that it can get built. But pretty much every time we've looked into it, it can get built. Now it's just restrictions on if there's setbacks, if there's parking, if there's size limitations. So there's different restrictions depending on each specific property. So it's hard to know that without getting an address and doing a site visit and kind of doing some digging.
Okay. And quickly, I'm not going to hold you to this number, but let's just say an ADU somewhere between 500 and 1,200 square feet. What would be the typical permit fees?
About $10,000 to $15,000.
And that's excluding any sort of architectural costs.
Correct. Yeah, so these kind of numbers can vary greatly depending on what kind of additional services your property needs. For example, do you need to upgrade your water system or your water pipes because you're already maxed out the number of fixtures that you could have in your house? Or if you need an engineering because you're on a hillside, so you need to call an engineer out there, that might cost a few $1,000s. Or if you are on a septic system and we need to relocate your septic lines, right? So we're doing one of those out in East County where we have to relocate septic lines or the leach lines because of where they want the ADU. So there's a lot of different considerations and factors that could cost more or less depending on each individual property.
On your example earlier, talking about your personal like guest house and the difference the guest house and ADU for coastal.
Yeah.
Are there any other more restrictive, I guess, issues if you're dealing with the coastal commission, like parking maps or anything like that? Or is there other things to be considered there?
No, for the most part, we haven't seen them put on additional restrictions over and above what the city has. They pretty much just approve it. The problem why these things cost $15,000 plus with coastal is that they're paying a plan reviewer $85 an hour to review the same plans that the city's already reviewed.
Nice, lovely.
Right. So you know how it is. There's some element of lost efficiency when dealing with government type entities.
For sure.
So they're working on it. So this is just in the background. You can kind of see pictures of mine. My upstairs is upgraded a little bit, but this is basically a 2-car garage with the 10-foot ceilings in the basement that had a second floor added, and above the second floor is a rooftop. So this is the rooftop. You can kind of see there's some seating. Here's with the solar shade up and some string lights. And a couple nice bathrooms, 2 big bedrooms, and that's how that one looks.
With building, for instance, that's a perfect example because a question on mine that I have is like, if you are, the whole process, I know you're saying is like 9 months to maybe 12 months. How much of that is actually the construction? How much of it is the planning, as in if you were planning ahead and, had tenants stay in a home that had the garage that you wanted to build over, to be able to efficiently, whenever you have them move out and then do the construction, how much time down would you see?
Yeah, absolutely. So the planning portion itself, where someone's got to come out and measure, one of the things that people don't realize when they're doing a construction project like this is that with the plans that you have to send in, the draftsman or the architect has to come out and measure your whole property. Mm-hmm. So they have to submit plans that are as built, which is what your house is currently, and then proposed, which is what it's going to look like with the ADU on it. So they not only have to draw up the plans for the new ADU, they have to measure out your entire current house, right? So that process of measuring the house and getting the plans drawn up per your specifications, custom to each property, custom to what the client wants, typically takes between 4 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
And then the city is required to return those submitted plans within 60 days. So that whole permit and plan portion can take between 3 to 4 months.
Gotcha. Okay.
The construction portion, if everything lines up and goes as perfect as possible, we can do it in 4 months.
Okay.
But we kind of tell people to average, expect about 6, so we have a couple months of buffer time for weather delays or other issues that might pop up.
Perfect. And when you mentioned the renovation, like renovation loans and, the cost of those and whatnot, going into it, when someone's purchasing a property that maybe their initial intent is to add an ADU off the bat, have you experienced, for instance, with like the VA reno loan, basically doing that right off the bat, adding that in, getting that factored into that appraisal?
Yeah, so the tough thing that I've seen, so I'll admit we haven't done many of these with renovation loans. The biggest issue is that, one, you might not have a seller that's willing to wait the 45 or 60 days it takes to get that approval.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Right. So it might be easier as a refi if you work with a company like Loan Depot or some other lenders. I think they offer their refinances at much cheaper or almost free to refinance with them. So if you buy it with them, then refi into a renovation loan, and then refi back out into a conventional, your fees should be reduced by working with a company that specializes in renovation loans like Loan Depot.
Cool.
It's tough because if you buy a house, with 3 or 5% down, you don't have any instant equity. Additionally, when you're using a renovation loan, you typically have to go upfront with the planning and permit fees because the lender is going to want to see a detailed construction bid, and we can't give you a detailed construction bid until we see the build plans.
Gotcha.
Right. So when I was talking about this earlier, the first phase is the design phase where we kind of get the plans drawn up, and the second phase is the build phase. We do a bid based on the plans that we've drawn up from the design phase. And at any point, the client could go to another contractor and say, hey, we've got the design plans done. Could you bid this out? And that's totally acceptable. That's why we do it in 2 stages. So we can help you with the design and value engineer it. Ideally, we've built your trust and earned your trust to work with us through the construction phase. But if you want to go get a bid from someone else, that's not a problem. You'd have plans that are ready to go with anyone else.
Gotcha.
So this is that garage conversion I showed you pictures of. It's all completed now. They built it custom and painted it custom for mom. And so, don't judge us on the colors. But they put in a full-size kitchen. But this was just a 400 square foot garage they converted. You can see that it's got the tall ceilings in that picture there to the right with the vaulted ceilings. So kind of common area, kitchen, and then a bathroom and a bedroom, and that's it. Washer dryer stack. We have these mini split units that are kind of efficient that we've been putting in more commonly because that way you can just heat a bedroom or just heat and cool a family room and not both if you're not using both spaces. Kind of see some of the before pictures down here.
What was the total cost for that build out?
Yeah, so this one, typically when we do garage conversions, it's usually 100 to 120,000. This one was on the higher end because we had to do the whole new ceiling structure. So this one was 120.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and so that included everything, all the appliances, the HVAC system, obviously the lighting and the windows, the permits, the plans, everything was 120.
I have a question for you, Henish. So I have a client who actually has been looking at homes. It's just him, and he's been looking at like 3 to 4 bedroom homes in Point Loma and PB that he'd like to section off like a rental unit. So there wouldn't be any construction for like, say, like a bathroom because he's found properties where there's like enough bathrooms where he could section off the house where that bathroom is and then kind of make rooms from there and then produce a kitchen somehow and like into a studio-ish configuration. Is that something, like obviously you need permits, is that something similar to this? Like you'd have to go through the same process?
Yeah, correct. So if you're trying to make a separate rentable unit, you're basically doing an attached ADU. So
Okay.
you can convert a portion of your house into a separate rentable unit by doing it as an attached ADU.
Okay.
Whether that's with the existing house that's there or if you needed to add square footage, doesn't matter, right?
Okay.
But when you have an attached ADU, one of the key requirements is that it can't be bigger than 50% the size of the rest of the house.
Right. Okay.
Right. And then he could also convert another bedroom into a junior ADU. You could have 3 separate legal units on one single family zone property.
Okay. And permits are the same for, obviously, for that 10 to 15 and
It really varies. Permit fees are calculated depending on how many departments at the city need to review the plans.
okay.
So if you're converting a house, you don't need the same type of review that you would need if you're building a standalone structure or an addition, right? Because you're not doing foundation changes, you're not doing roof line changes, you don't need to check out fire sprinkler systems and things like that. So it'd probably be a lot less to do something that's already built and converting it versus building a new structure, because there's less review time necessary with the city.
Okay, awesome. Perfect. Thank you.
Have you done much so far in like opportunity zones?
Yeah, honestly, no, I haven't. But yeah, there's a lot of action going on there. That's for sure.
Gotcha.
Because those opportunity zones, I feel like, are more targeted towards commercial developments and multi-units versus just single family. But one of the key things that's overlapping with some of these opportunity zones is that if they're in a transit priority zone near a trolley stop, or if they're upzoning anytime soon, there's a strong impetus there to take your single family and turn it into a 2 or 4 unit, like legally, and have it really blown out, versus just adding a garage unit or something like that. So along the trolley lines that are getting expanded, they're rezoning all of those areas to make them much higher density in upzoning them to allow more units per acre.
I think that's a conversation I'll have with you coming up soon as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Anybody else have any questions? I've got a couple questions, but I want to turn off the recording before I ask those.
Sure.
Anybody?
I don't have a question, but I do have an investment property for you, Henish, actually for everybody here. I have a place in OB Sunset Cliffs